Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is a video going over the introduction and basic strategies for the AP analysis essay. So the AP analysis essay is going to take all of the skills of rhetorical analysis that we've been working on, and it's going to ask you to read a passage and describe how that piece of writing works. Those passages could be speeches, letters, editorials, essays, or any other kind of written documentation that attempts to persuade or inform a reader. And your analysis essay is going to have to think about all of the appeals to kairos, the rhetorical situation, when it builds its analysis. So you're going to have to think about the context, the purpose, the genre or type of writing, the style, and rhetorical devices. And you're going to have to describe how it achieves its purpose. This essay is not evaluative, so you are operating under the impression that it is effective, but you are going to have to break down why it's effective. And in order to do that, you're going to have to think about what it's trying to achieve and who its audience is. And sometimes that purpose is really clear from the get-go. Other times you'll have to deduce it from reading the entire passage. The audience may or may not be explicitly stated. For instance, it may be a speech to a specific group of people, or it could be something that was printed in a newspaper. And you'll have to read through the passage to deduce who that audience is. You're going to have 45 minutes to write an essay for the AP analysis in class. Of course, when you actually take the test, you'll have 2 hours and 15 minutes as one big chunk of time for the entire 3 essay ordeal. So I'm going to give you 45 minutes because that's approximately what you should spend on this essay out of that 2 hours and 15 minutes. So each of the passages has background information, and the background information can give you the publication information, date and author of the piece, the type of writing, so letter, speech, essay, etc., relevant historical information, the target audience, and the purpose of the piece. Now, it doesn't always give all of this. And if it doesn't give you the audience and it doesn't give you the purpose, then AP is expecting you to pick up on that as you read the passage. As you read this background information, you ought to be highlighting the critical items to make sure to sort out in your mind who the audience is, what type of writing, when it was written, anything else that might be useful during your analysis. All of that is going to be really important because if you're going to explain how the piece works, you're going to need all of that surrounding context. The introduction information also includes instructions for writing the essay. Usually that's the exact same thing or very similar on all of these, and says something along the lines of what rhetorical moves does the author make in order to achieve his or her purpose. And that is really broad. Like, it will allow you to write about all kinds of different choices the author makes. One of the things that you should keep in mind is that you are not just on a hunt for figures of speech or some kind of recurring element. You are trying to break down why the author starts where he does, why he brings up what he brings up when he does, why he uses the examples he does. If he uses imagery, why does he use it? I liken it to asking the students how a certain type of tree works in the ecosystem of the forest. The answer to that question can't be it's tall and leafy. You're not just going to describe features of the text. You're going to describe how the features of the text were chosen deliberately to advance the author's purpose, given his or her audience, time period, and context. As you read the passage, you need to be noting the kinds of things that you might want to talk about. What are specific moves the author is making that are of interest, of note? Where are the transitions? Where are there places where there's particularly illustrative examples? Yes, you are going to identify figures of speech during this so that you might talk about them. Some of these passages may not use figurative language very much. So if you're doing Martin Luther King, yeah, you're going to have tons of allusion and repetition, and like he's a master of those figures of speech. But if you read a presidential address from 2 years ago, it may not have that kind of figures of speech involved. If you read something that's really contemporary, it may be more straightforward in the way it uses language, but that doesn't mean there aren't features of the text that are interesting or worthy of note. But it's good to be an active reader, noting places where you see some things, so that then when you get to the outlining and brainstorming process, you have some ideas about what is relevant to share with the AP readers. Now, when you're trying to outline your essay, there are 3 different ways in which you ought to think about how to organize your essay. One of it is describing the piece of writing in the order that it appears. So, one of the things that you can do is you can divide up the piece into phases. So, perhaps there's an introductory phase where the first couple 3 paragraphs are just about setting up everything to come. Then maybe there's a second phase, which is the half of the rest of the piece, where he goes through a certain idea. And then there's a third phase where he shifts to a call to action, or he shifts to another mode or style, or perhaps a different emotion that he appeals to. And you could have a body paragraph talking about the introduction phase, talking about the first half of the body phase, and then a third paragraph talking about that third part. And basically, you divide the text into different chunks and you would describe everything that happens there. So if he uses imagery in the introduction, you would talk about imagery as part of your analysis of his introduction. But if it's only in there once, you don't want to write a whole paragraph about just that. You might want to also note that he makes an appeal to emotions through some humor, or whatever he does in that opening. You can also describe the essay by rhetorical or stylistic device. So let's say that you're reading a passage that has tons of biblical allusions. It's constantly making references to the Bible. Its audience happens to be very religious. You could have a whole paragraph about just those choices. And so if you're doing this, then you're trying to find recurring writing moves the author makes, whether those are figures of speech or certain appeals or certain types of examples, and writing in a whole paragraph about how all of those work in the piece. This one is a little bit harder if there aren't recurring choices the author makes. If the author's not doing something again and again, you don't want to write a whole paragraph about the one time you saw personification in the whole piece. But if there are recurring elements, this might be a way to organize your essay well. Then finally, the last resort is to describe the essay by the 3 major appeals. So this is something that you would do if you've got nothing else. You could write a paragraph about how it appeals to logos, then one about how it appeals to ethos, and then one about how it appeals to pathos. One of the challenges with this is that those are really broad terms, and so you're going to have to be specific about how it develops that appeal. So if it appeals to logos, what exactly is it bringing up that supports the logic of the argument or the message of the argument? Once you determine the organization for the piece, I like to go back through the highlighting and change the colors to color code what examples you're going to use for each paragraph, or writing a little 1, 2, or 3 for points 1, 2, or 3 in the margins, so that you've got all your quotes lined up and you don't forget anything that you really wanted to include as you're writing. So with 45 minutes, you've probably spent about 15 to 20 doing all of this. Then it's time to write the essay. And if you really know what you're about to write, 25 to 30 minutes is more than enough time. So I suggest you invest some time into the brainstorming process, into the setup process, so that the writing becomes so much more coherent and easier and faster to complete. As you're writing it, AP analysis essays, the grading is looking for a really good rough draft. So they're not looking for something like the evaluation essay where you were asked to go through the entire writing process, polish it, make everything perfect. There are going to be some speed errors. There are going to be some grammar errors. Those are going to be generally forgiven so long as they're not so prevalent that they get in the way of being able to understand what you're saying. But what you ought to do is try to sound like a mature writer. And it's easier to do that if you adhere to the different writing choices that we've talked about in class. Trying to be in third person, making sure you have transitions between paragraphs. If you can handle it, Schaefer or 3x paragraphs in the body paragraphs. Things like that will make you sound more mature and make your writing sound more developed. You also should try to avoid transcribing long quotes or writing huge summaries of the text. If you are describing a certain choice the author makes and you could get away with an indirect quotation, then I would do so. Writing verbatim specific quotes can be time consuming, especially if you're handwriting these, but even if you're typing these, trying to select it and make sure it fits and is integrating your own words can be challenging. If you're talking about syntax or diction, then yeah, you need to show specific quoted phrases. But if you're talking about something else, you do not have to have 3 lines of quotation. You have to remember that on the real AP test, AP readers read the same question. So someone has been hired, a teacher or professor has been hired just to grade question 2, the analysis, over and over and over again. They know the passage better than you ever will. And so you're just using quotation in order to focus them on your point. And so you want to make sure that it's purposeful when you do. The other thing is you need to directly address the author's purpose and audience. That is how you're going to get some commentary. That's how you're going to actually have some depth beyond just pointing out certain things. Of course, after you write your essay, if you have a couple minutes left, it's always good to go through and fix those speed errors and try to clean up as much as you can. If you do all of this, you'll have a successful AP analysis essay, and of course, we'll be practicing in class.